Now that the New Orleans Saints are eliminated from playoff contention, the rest of the season becomes about their future. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, the New Orleans Saints are officially eliminated from playoff contention. We'll dive into what is to watch, what you should be watching for over the course of the next coming months, right? Looking ahead to the offseason, things like that. We're going to also take a look at this week's game tonight. The New Orleans Saints traveling to Green Bay, the frozen tundra, to take on the Green Bay Packers. I'll tell you why it can be a game of big plays and downfield plays if the weather permits. We're going to kick everything off today with the short term. New Orleans Saints eliminated from playoff contention, and Spencer Rattler has the opportunity here to convince the New Orleans Saints that he can be their guy, but I want to tell you why it's a viable option if he does. We got that coming up for you on today's episode. So whether it's your first time or your next time, I appreciate you very much for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by friends over at FanDuel, where you can make every moment more. Right now, new customers can put $5 down and get $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Yeah, you're going to want to go over to FanDuel.com today to get started. The New Orleans Saints are officially eliminated from playoff contention after the win by the Atlanta Falcons over the New York Giants. Of course, the New York Giants are abysmal. Everyone expected the Atlanta Falcons to win there. No real big surprise when it comes to all that. So just something to keep an eye out for. But the Saints are now eliminated, which means that there's no playing for the postseason. There's no playing for the playoffs. And so where does the motivation come from for this team? And that's actually an easy thing to answer. Everyone on this team is being evaluated now. The coaching staff, the players, the roster, the medical staff, the front office, everyone's being evaluated for what they do throughout the rest of the season and how things go at the beginning of the offseason, right? Because you're going to see some folks getting interviews, things like that. Interim head coach Darren Rizzi doing interviews to try to get that interim tag removed, things like that. So we're going to begin to kind of see those really, really important auditions start this evening. And this evening, it will be the players as well as the coaching staff that are keenly in focus when it comes to that very conversation. And one player in particular, quarterback Spencer Rattler, has the opportunity to prove to the New Orleans Saints that he can be their guy moving forward. What makes these three starts different than the previous three starts that he did get? Well, I think that the preparation's a lot different in this one, right? Darren Rizzi's preparation has led the Saints to 3 wins in 5 games, nearly 4 wins in 5 games, and they were, not even close to that, 2-7 under Dennis Allen, and they spoke a lot about their lack of preparation, things that they felt weren't being coached the way they needed to be coached, things like that. Like even, I'm talking about Dennis Allen saying that they weren't coaching well and all those other things. So, I don't think you're hearing a lot of those same issues or seeing a lot of those same issues when it comes to the Saints so far since Darren Rizzi has taken over. So I think that helps a lot. I think having the interior offensive line is big. I think he's still missing weapons, right? No Rashid Shaheed, no Taysom Hill, no Alvin Kamara, no Chris Olave. Although what a great story Chris Olave has been being back out on the practice field. I wrote a column about that over at LouisianaSports.net that I was super proud of. But really, really cool stuff there just in terms of seeing a guy kind of having his life go back to what his life was. You know what I mean? Just a great human story out of all of it. But Spencer Rattler is one of the players, along with like Kendre Miller, along with Taliesin Fuanga, along with Kool-Aid McKinstry and Alontae Taylor, that we've been highlighting over the course of last week, of the young players that have the opportunity to prove something. And I want to really highlight Spencer Rattler here and what he has the opportunity to improve. Because you remember we did a show last week where I closed out and I mentioned that very likely Derek Carr will be on the roster next season and will be the starting quarterback next season for the New Orleans Saints in 2025, but that there are ways for the team to get away from that should they decide that they don't want to. right, go down that road. But the only way that they decide to go down the road is if they feel like they have a better option. Here is Spencer Rattler's opportunity to prove that he is the better option, right? He's got to prove that. He's got to show that, because right now it's potential. He needs to turn potential into proof and promise. And that's why these last 3 games are really, really important. And he's excited about the opportunity, of course, as the guy that has been kind of doing the underdog thing for a while. He was the number 1 guy until he wasn't. And then when he wasn't the number 1 guy anymore, then you kind of saw him have to manage a lot of adversity. This is nothing new for him and the attitude that he's built. You saw the way that he spoke Saturday in terms of his pregame presser, talking about his preparation over the course of the week, how things have been different, all those other things, and including all the way down to working with the rest of the quarterback room and quarterback coach Andrew Janocko in a freezer so that they could get a little bit used to the cold temperatures and things like that. Andrew Janocko continues to be very innovative in the way that he approaches a bunch of different things. One of the reasons why I love covering him. Does a lot of really cool stuff. The other thing that I want to mention, though, and we've talked about this on the show before too, is that I've been told by people with knowledge of the situation that the Saints do not feel that they are married to Derek Carr just because they restructured him. They feel they could move if they needed to. But in order for them to even get to that place, it would have to be a situation in which they know they have the guy to go to. So that's why these last 3 games become really important for Spencer Rattler in particular. So let me just kind of explain a little bit of the numbers behind what it would look like this offseason to move on from Derek Carr, should they do that. I'll write this up over at louisianasports.net so that it's written up as well. Insiders, you'll get this a little early. But just to kind of go through these numbers. You restructure, you're going to have to restructure a lot of players, and you're going to need a couple of players to retire, and you're probably going to have to cut a couple of players as well. But getting compliant with the salary cap is not as easy as designating Derek Carr a post-June 1 cut and then saving $30 million. You don't save that $30 million right away. You have to carry that $33 million through free agency, through the draft, and all the way to June 2nd. And even though he won't be on your team for the time that you make that decision, which they would have to make that decision before the third day of the league year, which I believe is March 14th, if I remember correctly. It's either March 14th or March 17th. It's one of those two. So they'll have to make that decision before then, much like the Falcons are making that decision with Kirk Cousins, right? They're expected to cut him. And that's kind of what brings this up, right? If the Falcons can do it, if the Giants can do it, if the Broncos were able to do it years ago, why can't the Saints? Well, part of the reason is because the Saints are $63 million over the salary cap next year, and none of those other teams were. But here's what the Saints could do. They could restructure players like Alvin Kamara, Cameron Jordan, Demario Davis, Eric McCoy, Tyrann Mathieu, Carl Granderson, Cesar Ruiz. A lot of aging veterans in there to restructure, but this is the trade-off. You either roll with what you got and restructure Derek Carr and then give him another year, or you got to restructure all these other guys. So you restructure all those players. You're going to have a retirement probably from Ryan Ramczyk. We'll see what happens with Taysom Hill. Either you can reduce his salary or potentially he ends up retiring as well, just depending upon how things go with the injury. I don't know. We'll see there. And then cut a player like I don't think Jamal Williams will be back next year. I think Jamal Williams would like an opportunity to go somewhere else. I don't think that he's necessarily been a fit in this offense. Move on from him, and then boom, you're compliant with the salary cap by like $300,000. Then you got to make more decisions, right? You can move on from guys. You can restructure, Nathan Shepard. You can make some more changes on the interior defensive line. You can move on from a guy, certain wide receivers and stuff like that might not fit in the new scheme that might be coming in. You can move on from some people in the running back room, all that. And so I went with like Colin Saunders, restructured Nathan Shepard, moved on from Cedric Wilson Jr., Cam Peterson, and Jordan Mims. Cam Peterson would have to clear a physical. And then all of a sudden you're $9 million under the salary cap, and you're still $83 million under the salary cap in 2026. By the time that you get to the point where you're then posting that post-June 1 transaction for Derek Carr, at which time you would get a new $30 million on June 2nd, and you'd be over $100 million under the salary cap in 2026. It's all possible. You just have to be willing to restructure more of the aging veterans, but it's a lot less money that you're restructuring for those aging veterans moving forward. Some things would escalate that would chip away at that over $100 million that you're under the salary cap for 2026, but that's the way that you can do it. So it is possible for the New Orleans Saints to make a move here, but they need somebody to prove that they're a better option or that they are a viable option. And that's why the next 3 games for Spencer Rattler, starting with tonight, are very, very, very important for his future and the future of this team. Coming up next, we'll take a look at this game tonight, where Spencer Rattler could prove himself, and why this could be a game of big plays if weather permits. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on some regular season action as well over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, especially for new customers, because right now new customers can put $5 down, and if they win their first $5 bet, you can get $250 in bonus bets added to your account. So you can go in for tonight's game. The New Orleans Saints are going to be 14.5-point underdogs presently up against the Green Bay Packers. You think they might be able to cover? Think they might pull off some kind of a wild upset? You could take the Green Bay Packers as a massive favorite in this one as your first $5 bet, win that bet, get a little bit of a return on that, but then also get $250 in bonus bets on top of it as well. So go and check it out today. Just visit FanDuel.com to join now. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. All right, family, it's going to be snowy. It's going to be cold. It might be snowy, I don't know, but it's going to be cold over in Lambeau Field, or at Lambeau Field, for tonight's game between the New Orleans Saints and the Green Bay Packers. And while that could potentially end up disrupting some of the big play opportunities, there could still be some big plays to be had in this matchup. And the New Orleans Saints are going to be on both the good and bad side of that conversation. The Green Bay Packers have been outstanding so far this season on the defensive side with limiting big plays, particularly downfield passes. And this is where Spencer Rattler has an opportunity to be able to go up against a new challenge. The Green Bay Packers so far, when it comes to this season, have allowed the lowest completion percentage above expected. So what it is that you basically look at like an expected completion percentage for a team to allow, and then either they're allowing more than that by a certain number of percentage, or they're allowing less than that based on kind of like league averages and things like that. But also like their own averages. There's a lot that kind of goes into place for it. But with completion percentage above expected, they're actually 13.2% less than the expectation when it comes to their defense on deep passing attempts. So typically what you're seeing is that when teams challenge the Green Bay Packers deep, the Green Bay Packers do not allow for that completion to happen. And quarterbacks also aren't challenging very much. According to Next Gen Stats, quarterbacks up against the Green Bay Packers have only tried 37 deep passing attempts so far this season. That's fourth lowest that any defense has faced so far in the 2024 season. So is it that they're not being challenged there? Or is it that they're hyper efficient when they are challenged there? It could be a little bit of both for sure when it comes to that. But the next piece to it is, can you utilize your kind of unfamiliar approach to the offense with a fresh quarterback here, with a fresh head coach, fresh decision maker, all that, to maybe challenge this team in a way that doesn't show up on tape that the Saints might typically look to challenge if you go all the way back to like week 1 and 2, where the Saints lived downfield with, with Derek Carr and Rashid Shaheed, and where they were hyper efficient when it came to all of that. So that's going to be a big thing to watch in this game. And does maybe the cold weather end up creating opportunities where, there's a little bit of a lack of concentration in the secondary? There's a player that slips or something like that. Are you able to take advantage of that? Well, here's how Spencer Rattler has done on deep passes, which are 20 plus yards or more so far downfield, air yards so far downfield. He's completed just 3 of his 13 attempts so far this season for 100 yards and 1 interception so far this season. But here's what I want to highlight out of that. 2 of those 3 completions were in last week's game in the second half up against the Washington Commanders. A big 39-yard completion to Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and then another 25-yard completion to him as well. A little bit of a catch and run in that situation. So when targeting downfield last week, Spencer Rattler looked a lot more efficient than he has over the course of the season. And I think some of that is having time with the starting offensive line and having a better decision maker in Darren Rizzi that's kind of, helping to kind of manage expectations and manage the game so far this season. You look at Jake Haener in that game, 1 of 3 on such passing attempts, according to Next Gen Stats, for 36 yards, but then also threw an interception in that situation as well. The Saints right now have recorded the 9th lowest catch rate on deep targets, which is crazy because they were way up on that list early on in the season. So if the weather permits, the Saints could potentially reach into their old bag of tricks here with, some new approaches and some new looks at things with a new quarterback, a new head coach, since the last time that the Saints were really out there with Spencer Rattler and all that, or starting with Spencer Rattler, that could end up having an impact, a positive impact for the New Orleans Saints. Over on the defensive side, where the Saints will struggle here, is going to be in yards after catch. They've allowed some of the most yards after catch so far this season. Alontae Taylor has been one of the most targeted corners and has allowed the most yardage, but also has 13 pass breakups or forced incompletions on the season as well. So there's a little bit of that, you can get the yardage there, but the Saints defense isn't giving up a ton in terms of points over the last 3 games, just over 17 points per game allowed. Yes, the Giants were in that equation, but so were the Washington Commanders, who just popped off over 30 yesterday. And of course, the Los Angeles Rams, who were in the top 10, top 7 when it comes to scoring offenses in the NFL. So the Saints defense has not allowed a lot of points. Can they keep that going? Because Green Bay is definitely going to look for the opportunity to take advantage of those big plays. They're tied for they're in the top 5 when it comes to, or let's say top 7 when it comes to 20-plus yard passing plays. They're in the top 3, top 5 when it comes to 40-plus yard passing plays. This is a big explosive offense that wants the big explosive plays. The Saints have surrendered those big explosive plays so far this season. That's why guys like Kool-Aid McKinstry, rookie, as well as first-year starter on the outside now, Alontae Taylor, are so important in this game, and why this game is such a huge, it comes with such magnitude for both of them, because they're looking to prove, just like Spencer Rattler's trying to prove, hey, I can be your next starting quarterback. They're trying to prove, hey, we're your next starting cornerback tandem. So this is going to be a big game for the both of them. Lastly, I want to take a look at the run game here. Now, the Saints run game, I don't want to go into trying to predict where the Saints run game is going to go here, because we got to see what it looks like. The New Orleans Saints are swearing up and down that it's going to be a running back by committee approach with Jamal Williams and Jordan Mims included. I think it needs to be heavily focused on Kendre Miller, especially being eliminated from the playoffs. Get an evaluation of your young piece and see what it is that you're going to be able to build with him next to Alvin Kamara next season. That's where I think that their biggest focus needs to be. So sure, you can running back by committee all you want, but to me, Kendre Miller by the end of this game should have somewhere between 15 to 25 carries in this matchup. He should be the focus in that run game. How the Saints are going to be able to, create kind of those breakaway runs and everything that's going to come down to their ability to set up those blocks. They do have their starting offensive line that did create some of those lanes, especially in the second half last week, and especially in that 2-minute drive, 4 rushes, 28 yards for Kendre Miller in that final drive. Huge for them in terms of their ability to be able to move the ball down the field and get into the end zone. But over on the Green Bay rushing side, this is where you really get a look at Josh Jacobs, who has been outstanding down the stretch. 12 rushing touchdowns so far this season. 11 of them have come since week 8. Here we are in week 16. So he has scored 99+% of his, or whatever it is. Sorry, I don't know what the percentage is, but he has scored over 90% of his touchdowns. Let's say it that way. In the last 50% of weeks in the NFL, right? Like this has been his kind of coming of age for the Green Bay Packers. He's also recorded the second most forced missed tackles so far this season, resulting in the 5th most yards after contact after missed tackles so far this season. And we know we've been talking about the New Orleans Saints and missed tackles. They have the 7th highest total of missed tackles so far this season with 97. And they're not that far off at number 7, right? The Indianapolis Colts lead off at number 1 with 118. So they're not super separated from that team. And keep in mind, the Saints still haven't played a game tonight yet, right? And they've missed double-digit tackles in games multiple times this season. So this is going to be a really big one. Inside rushes for Josh Jacobs are going to be the ones to watch. The Saints' interior defensive line has been very weak in the run game. 784 rushing yards so far on inside carries this season, according to Next Gen Stats by Josh Jacobs. And then he's forced 45 of his 89 missed tackles on those inside runs as well. So huge in terms of where Josh Jacobs can pick up some big plays too. So if the weather permits, between the New Orleans Saints getting risky, getting more aggressive, and having kind of the unfamiliar commodity at quarterback, and maybe, somebody trying to prove something, and then you look at that Green Bay offense up against the New Orleans Saints defense, this is an opportunity for big plays on both sides of the football for both of these teams. Who is going to be able to string together those big plays or stop those big plays is who will come out on top in this game. Coming up next, what should you be looking for over the course of the next couple of months now that the New Orleans Saints are already eliminated from the playoffs? This is uncharted territory a little bit for the New Orleans Saints. I'll explain why as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most fun way to play daily fantasy sports. You already love watching the game of football, and now, of course, you're going to love Prize Picks because of how much fun it is. This is how you should be playing daily fantasy football, not going up against a bunch of mystery lineups and just believing that you didn't get more points than the other people and the spreadsheet wizards and all that other stuff. Whether it's football, basketball, or whatever your favorite sports are, Prize Picks is the way to go. They're going to set a projection for players. All you got to do is choose more or less than that projection on 2 to 6 players, and you can win up to 1,000 times your money over on Prize Picks. And here through the month of December during Picksmas, they're also giving you 2 free picks as well. So that means that you can get your money right away. And speaking of right away, you can also withdraw quickly because you can also get your money from Prize Picks in less than 15 or as fast as 15 minutes. So go and check them out today. Download the Prize Picks app. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you place your first $5 lineup. That's $50 instantly when you place your first $5 lineup. It's Prize Picks. Run your game. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints elimination from the playoffs this early is a little bit of uncharted territory for the New Orleans Saints, but that does mean that you start to get a little bit of an early look at what's going to be happening over the course of the off season. We appreciate you very much, as always, for being here with us and joining us for another episode. By the way, John Hendricks and I over on the Second and Saints YouTube page are going to be live during the game. So make sure you come through, chat. We'll be working and doing all that stuff, so you get a little bit of an inside look at like the beat writer stuff and everything. Going to be a ton of fun. So make sure you come through over on Second and Saints. And of course, we'll be live here tonight after the game as well. It's Christmas week, so Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to everybody. Do know we will still have an episode for you every day. I don't care if it's Christmas, if it's Christmas Eve, if it's double Christmas, it does not matter to me. I will have an episode out to you. And so we'll still be 5 days a week this week. And it will have our crossover on Thursday with Q Myers, our guy over at Locked On Raiders, to get you ready for Sunday's matchup. But we're going to mostly be focusing on the future for the New Orleans Saints. Speaking of the future, does anything say the future more in the NFL than the NFL draft? Well, the New Orleans Saints right now, sitting at 5-9, are currently holding the number 10 pick in the NFL draft. A loss will not improve their draft status. It will not take them to 9 or anything like that, because everybody that's below them, the 3 teams that are below them, the Carolina Panthers, New York Jets, and Chicago Bears, are all 4-11. So if the Saints lose, they go down to 5-10, and so they're going to stay exactly where they are. They're right ahead of San Francisco, who's at 6-9. I believe, if I understand the tiebreakers correctly, because the Saints, believe it or not, have a better division record than the San Francisco 49ers, that if the Saints win and tie with the San Francisco 49ers, and the 49ers and Saints will flip. And I believe that will put the Saints at the 11th overall selection with an upset win this evening. But again, it's 14.5-point underdogs. Doesn't feel likely that the Saints are going to walk away with that kind of thing. So the reason why I highlight that is because that's really the thing, the NFL draft, that is kind of the last moment of new acquisition, right? So what happens between now and the NFL draft is going to be, let's just say, entertaining, intriguing, very fun to watch. It should be a busy season for the New Orleans Saints. They're in a little bit of uncharted territory being eliminated this early. Usually they're like in a situation in week 18 where they've got to win and then somebody else has to lose in order for them to get in, or somebody else has lost and given them the opportunity, then they got to win to get in or something like that. They've usually been like at home waiting for somebody else to win them in. That's kind of been the situation over the course of the past few years. But now 4 straight years of playoff drought for the New Orleans Saints. This is the first time since the 2002 to 2005 seasons, that the Saints have gone 4 straight years without a postseason appearance. And you remember what happened in that 2005 offseason. After that 2005 season, in 2006, they hired a new head coach, went and got themselves a new quarterback, went and got themselves a phenomenal running back at second overall selection in Reggie Bush. Of course, before that, I'm mentioning Sean Payton and Drew Brees. And then it set off the golden era of the New Orleans Saints after that, right? From 2006 to, I'd say, 2020, since that was their last playoff appearance. Don't forget 2021, which was still a Sean Payton year, was their first situation here where they ended up being outside the playoffs, but that was post Drew Brees, of course. So, will the Saints find their next Sean Payton, Drew Brees, Reggie Bush, all that this year? Probably not, right? Like, it's not likely that you're going to hit on all that, but that's where their mind has to be at this point already, right? It doesn't matter what their record is at this point. They do have right now, I think it's like a 387 win percentage, which is their lowest win percentage in a season since that 2005 season where they went 3-13. So it was like a 188 or whatever it was. So a lot of similarities still to like a lot of things that are happening right now harken back to that 2005 season. But are you going to be able to find the success in the 2025 offseason the way you found success in that 2006 offseason? At least finding some percentage of that success, though, is what the New Orleans Saints will need to do going into 2025. So what are we watching over the course of the next little bit? So you're watching these games still because you're looking for the young talent to prove themselves, and you're watching the rest of the Darren Rizzi audition, right? You're also watching the rest of the coaching staff audition for either their next head coach or for Darren Rizzi still, right? If Darren Rizzi ends up being retained, he doesn't have to keep the exact same staff. He could make changes. Don't forget, Darren Rizzi is not the only technical interim in this situation. You look at Joe Woods as an interim defensive play caller, even though he already had the title of defensive coordinator. Dennis Allen was the archetype and play caller of that defense. So even Joe Woods right now is kind of doing a little bit of an audition post his Cleveland Browns days. So for the Saints, you're looking for the coaching shakeup, which I imagine the Saints are not going to be one of the first teams to hire their head coach unless they are going to stick with Darren Rizzi. It's very likely that Detroit is going to play its way deep into the playoff conversation, the postseason conversation, probably be a Super Bowl contender, should be a Super Bowl contender at least. And if that's the case, 2 of the top guys on the board aren't going to even be able to be interviewed until after that Super Bowl is all wrapped up. So I wouldn't expect New Orleans to go into the Senior Bowl with a head coach. In fact, if they went into the Senior Bowl with a head coach and it's not Darren Rizzi, and they just chose not to take a look at Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson, that's probably not the greatest decision-making, right? So I would expect the Saints to go to the Senior Bowl without a head coach, which is fine. That's okay. I think people make a really big deal about that as if the head coach is the only person that knows talent. That's not the way that it works. The head coach is being introduced to these players probably for the first time in interviews and things like that, but it's really the college scouting staff that's been looking at these guys for years and years and years already that goes in and builds up sort of their scouting report, how they would fit in the team, how they would do all this other stuff. And then they give that to the coaching staff, and then the coaching staff ends up coming up with their evaluations of what those players can be, are in their system, all that other stuff. And so you would still gather that information. It would just be reviewed at a later time by the person that you ended up hiring, who, by the way, is probably already with another football team and is still at the Senior Bowl in some capacity, or has some representation at the Senior Bowl at some capacity, and is still receiving the information. They're just getting it for a different team. And then they would just lift that scheme from that team to this team and then say, yes, these people still fit in this. So you're not really missing out on anything by not having your head coach appointed by the time that the Senior Bowl rolls around. You'll be fine. But going in the combine, going into, of course, free agency in the draft, that's where it's most important to have that head coach. The Saints will be fine. Even if they wait until after the Super Bowl, they'll definitely have all of that done. So that's, I think, the timeline that you're looking for, is for the Saints to make their decision on their head coach post Super Bowl, potentially even post, well, it's definitely going to be post Senior Bowl, but then you might hear some things, right? You might be like, oh, okay, well, the Saints are zeroing in on this person after the Senior Bowl. So the Senior Bowl is going to be really interesting because it's going to have all these guys in the room at the same time. And even though the Saints can't technically interview a coordinator the way that they did with, the way that they, might have had early contact or whatever with Clint Kubiak. I don't know how that all worked out, but we knew at the Senior Bowl that he was going to be the hire. It's a little bit different when you're a coordinator. So that's kind of the timeline that you're watching throughout all this. And then once that new coach is appointed, then you're going to see the this player is released, this player is getting restructured. Here's the decision on Derek Carr. Here's, and then they'll go into free agency and make all those decisions. But the decisions of who won't be around outside of maybe a couple of players, which could be retirement related, could be that player wanting out related, whatever. Some of those decisions are not going to be, the biggest of those decisions are probably not going to be made until that new head coach is hired, because it will be that new head coach's vision, scheme, all that other stuff that helps to make that decision. So that's when you can expect, like the quarterback decision, for instance, would be after that head coach is appointed. So that's what you're looking at. It speeds the process up a little bit in terms of early evaluation of looks at things, but still expect this to take some time in the months following the Super Bowl, in the months following the regular season. All right, y'all. Once again, happy holidays to you. We'll be seeing you here all throughout the week. I'll be live later on tonight, late after the Monday Night Football game. During the Monday Night Football game, you can catch myself and John Hendricks over at Second and Saints, as we'll be live and watching the game and kind of doing some chats and stuff like that. So it'll be fun. So make sure you come through for all of that. We appreciate you very much. As always, make it as your first listen. For your second listen, make sure you're going to check out Locked On NFL. And we thank you very much for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.